So maybe we'll go ahead and kick off. So thank you all for joining us this morning. I'm Rachel Zenberry. I'm one of the co-chairs of the EDI network. And we are thrilled to have this joint October meeting today with the EDI network and the Small Practices network to talk about the intersection of EDI and small practices. Let's see, so today what we are planning on doing is just introducing a little bit about who both of our knowledge communities are. And then we have a wonderful panel today who are going to be speaking about the way that they've been approaching the challenges and opportunities of equity, diversity, and inclusion within their own small practices. And during that time, we are going to be opening up the chat for any questions you might have as they explore those individual topics. And then we'll have some opportunity for Q&A for everybody at the end. So just as an introduction to the EDI network, for those of you who haven't attended any of our sessions before, we really have been focused on creating a space for conversations around the promotion and awareness and support of issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion, both in our practices as individuals and in our profession as a whole. I'll just mention before I go any further that we are recording this session so that those folks who were not able to join us, and for those of you who'd like to reference this later for your colleagues, have that opportunity. So for anyone, I just would like everybody to be aware so that you know that anything that you speak about today, or if you share anything on your computer, that will be part of the recording. We at the EDI network have been really focused over the past year on building resources for firms of all sizes and scales to use as you balance the issues of EDI that we're all facing in our practice. And I'll encourage anyone to visit the EDI network page. The list on the left is a list of many different resources that both the network as well as the BSA at large have put together, including policies and practices. We have a video archive of all of our prior events and recommended resources, including readings, and actually we have an EDI book club that meets monthly as well, called On the Same Page, that has been, that people have really enjoyed. So I encourage you to check that out as well. And before I hand it over to Kristen, who's going to talk a little bit about the Small Practices Network, I'll just share the practices that we like to reinforce in every one of our meetings, which are to always assume good intentions, be aware of your impact, and don't wait for perfection. And most importantly, we're all here to listen to learn and not to be reinforced. So Kristen, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kristen Genatasio. I'm the co-chair of the BSA Small Practices Network, along with Christina Marsh. And we're also co-owners of Atelier et Alia, a small architecture firm out of West Newton. The Small Practices Network is a group of small firm practitioners that meets monthly to discuss all sorts of topics relevant to small firms. We technically define small firms as those with less than 15 people. However, our meetings are open to everyone. We typically have invited guests or panelists that join us to share their expertise, but we also schedule networking and roundtable style sessions for general discussions and the sharing of resources. We meet typically on the third Thursday of every month from noon to 1:30. And please feel free to visit the SPN section of the BSA website for more information and also for recordings of our past sessions. And we also have a LinkedIn group. Everyone's welcome to join in if you'd like. So we're very excited for this opportunity to collaborate with the EDI network to bring you today's panel discussion. And first, I would like to give you a brief introduction of the panelists. They're all small firm practitioners who are leaders in the EDI community, and we're thrilled that they were able to join us today to share resources and answer questions. Natasha Espada is an architect and founder of Studio Ani. She's very active at the BSA, serving on multiple committees, and was president in 2020. Within her firm and the broader community, she promotes equity, diversity, and inclusion and has been a guest speaker on this topic in multiple forums. Ali Horowitz is an architect at Studio G, a small, diverse, women-owned firm with a focus on building sustainable communities. In addition, she's also president of BOSNOMA, the Boston chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects. And Brooke Henderson is an architect at Analog Studio, a small, diverse, multidisciplinary firm that works across multiple scales and typologies. Brooke is active with the BSA's Women in Design Group and the EDI Task Force. So our panelists have all prepared brief introductions, and I'm going to hand it over to them at this time. Ali, would you like to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Ali Horowitz, and as Kristen mentioned, I am an architect at Studio G and also the current president of BOSNOMA. So just to give a little bit more background about myself and what brings me here today, I didn't take a direct path into architecture. I have a liberal arts degree from Occidental College where I studied Chinese and Japanese language, and I minored in critical theory and social justice. So this education really gave me the foundation for how I think and how I approach everything that I do in my work. And it gave me the ability to look at things from multiple perspectives and to think about things through a more critical lens. And this education really gave me the tools and the language to understand things in terms of equity and social justice. And even when thinking about my own identity as a mixed race person of Japanese and Jewish descent. And so this thought process is something that I bring into everything that I do, even though at the time I didn't know that that would be architecture. But after undergrad, I took a few years off, then I got my master's in architecture from Northeastern. And my career in architecture has been all based in Boston, first with Wilson Butler Architects and now with Studio G. And 3 years ago, I learned about and joined BOSNOMA. And it was really an instantly welcoming and supportive community. So I knew that I wanted to be more engaged with them and more involved in the organization. And now with my current role as president, BOSNOMA has really empowered me to use my voice. And I've just been constantly learning how to better use my position and my privilege to not only speak up for myself, but for others, to lift up others beside me and to hold the door open for those who are coming after me. Because as we all know, the path into architecture can be very challenging and there are many obstacles. So it's always our goal to help make it more accessible, to really build towards a more diverse and inclusive future in the profession. And someone in BOSNOMA described once the role of an architect as that of a translator. And this really stuck with me because it tied back to my studies of language. And I just think it's really an important way to think about what we do. A lot of us probably think of ourselves as designers, as artists, as builders, as many other things, and we can and are all of those things. But I do think that role as a translator is really at the core of what we do, because it's really our job to take the needs of our clients and the needs of the community and translate those into space. And so all of this to me is really about communication. So I'm really happy to be here today as part of this panel, and I'm excited to continue this conversation with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Brooke, would you mind going next?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, everyone. I'm Brooke Henderson. I am an architect with Analog Studio, located in Cambridge these days. I've been there for 7 years, and that has been my main experience in Boston. I did my schooling in the Midwest in Minnesota and then at Washington University in St. Louis. And it's interesting to learn more about people's backgrounds. I had a more direct path. I kind of knew that I wanted to be in architecture, but it's been, as I'm sure you all know, a very evolutionary process of understanding really what that means and everything it entails. And I've enjoyed learning about that every day. I guess my journey, I started out at a medium firm, I went to a large firm, and then from that experience, I knew that I probably wanted to be at a smaller firm. We are at the top of your range. We're about 15 people, but when I started, we were only 6. And so it's been really fun to grow together and get to know everyone. I think, I really like the nature and agency of a small firm where you can get to know everyone, and if there's something you want to do, you can kind of bring it up and do it. So I think that ties into a lot of the conversations we may have today. I guess me personally, some interests are, workplace culture is something that I've been involved a lot in, not only from a diversity standpoint, but also flexibility and time, and just looking at how practice is working for practitioners and how that's evolving. And I've done some work in the past at ABX, exploring that, and continue to do that at our work and just kind of on my own time. Also building community. I really enjoyed being part of Women in Design. It's one of the first things I did when I moved here was go there. And so I'm sure you guys, many of you may have similar experiences with the BSA, kind of finding your network and your people. And I think that's really important aspect to consider. And for me, also problem solving, kind of like Ali said, like design has a lot to do with everything. And it's not just the project or the rendering, but also, the process that we go through and the communications we have and the relationships with clients and the RFI problems that we encounter. All of that is a really fun problem to solve for me. And I like to think of all of that as part of what we do.
Thank you, Brooke. Natasha?
Hi, everyone. I'm Natasha Spada. I'm the founding principal of Studio NA Architects, which I started 8 years ago after 20 years and being an associate principal at Lears Wines Apfel. We're a diverse women and minority design firm focusing on institutional, commercial, cultural, and civic projects. And we range from 10 to 12 architects, and we design projects of all different scales. We do this by increasing capacity as collaborators with larger firms. We're working with a lot of firms in town. And we do approximately 60% of the projects on our own, and then the others through these partnerships. So I've been a member of the BSA since 1995, and I've been involved with Women in Design, Women's Principles Group, the Women in Design Mentoring Program, AIA Women's Leadership Summit. So I did a lot of work with women in architecture for a long time. And recently, since maybe 2 years ago or so, I've been somewhat involved with BOSMA, which I'm really proud to be, and hopefully can do more of that after I finish my board tenure this year, because I've been a board member for the past 6 years, and I was the VP for membership for 3 years, and I was president of the board last year and past president this year. So since 2018, and as the first Latinx president of the BSA, which I'm really proud of, I was a collaborator on the equity in practice guide based on the AIA Equitable Guides for Practice that Rachel just showed. And I was also co-chair of the BSA's EDI and Social Justice Task Force, which I'm also proud to say has transformed into this EDI knowledge community co-chaired by Rachel, Dan, and Tony. So that's really been really exciting to see. But I've also had the opportunity to speak on equity at the Grassroots Conference for the AIA Women Leadership Summits, National, AIA Connecticut, New Hampshire, and others. And I was a juror recently on the AIA Impact Awards for Iowa. And then last month, I was the commencement speaker at Wentworth Institute of Technology and was recognized with an honorary degree for all my work on EDI. So I'm really committed to this. I've been working with DCAM and Tony on the partnership program with DCAM and others and Massport. So really excited to be able to talk to the small firms, not only because I have a small firm, but also because all of this work is really important right now.
Thank you, Natasha. And thank you for all those introductions. We have prepared a few questions for the panel. However, as Rachel mentioned, if anyone has a question, please feel free to add it to the chat, and we'll do our best to get to all of them. We'll hopefully have about 15 minutes at the end of the discussion today to just open it up to questions and discussion. So I'm going to jump in with the first question, and maybe Ali, you can start us off with this one. The question is, what resources would you recommend for small firms wanting to pursue EDI?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of the resources that Rachel mentioned at the beginning from the BSA are really helpful in terms of looking at examples of policies that firms have submitted to the BSA. But also one thing that BOSMA is working on right now is a DEI challenge. And this is started by Tony Ransom, who was our past president and is now the VP of the Northeast region of NOMA. He's also part of the EDI network, as Ruth mentioned earlier. And this is a program that was started by SoCal NOMA, and we're working on adapting it for Boston. And even though it's called a challenge, it's really about collaboration, especially in the first few years. So what we're doing is we're inviting firms, it's a voluntary program to join for firms who are looking for ways to increase EDI practices in their firms. And so we will be, Tony is working on creating a list of actions that firms can take, and there'll be a point system. And it's not so much, it's not about ranking firms. You know, we don't want to discourage anyone from joining if they feel that maybe they're not meeting all of these points, but it's more about finding a baseline, understanding where you are, understanding what the ways to improve are. And one of the things that we're hoping to do to really make this a collaborative effort is to have monthly or bi-monthly meetings with all of the participants, so everyone can share what has been working for them and what hasn't. And hopefully this will help smaller firms who maybe don't have access to as many resources as larger firms to really come together and help each other in the same process.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Natasha and Brooke, do you have anything else that you might suggest?
Yeah, I think, you know, AIA, BSA already have a lot of great resources to add to. I've also been liking something called Practice of Architecture, which has a podcast and kind of a network. I think it's fairly new, but they do a lot of interviews basically with people and, you know, crossing over into other industries, but also really focusing on diversity in all of its different avenues. And so I think that's a great one to touch on. And I think local cities also, you know, there's a lot coming out about this. And so I was poking around on some local government sites, and I think there's a lot of great resources there too.
And I think just all the work that was done last year for these guides that this group has been working on is a really good start. The BSA has a lot of resources. Sometimes you get overwhelmed with the amount of information that's out there. So I think that the guides for firms is a really good way to start, especially the cliff notes that we made of the actual guides. And then if there are certain areas, then you can read up more on them. But I think the biggest, for me, the biggest thing is being involved with this group, and then also being involved with BOSNOMA and other groups that are already doing work, not to invent things, but to see what is out there and then see where you want to be involved and you know, where you need help.
Great, thank you. I kind of have a related question. In terms of training resources, that larger firms can offer EDI training sessions to their staff, but smaller firms may not have the budget to afford such training. Is there a way that we can make training sessions affordable and accessible to smaller firms? Natasha?
Yeah, I think a couple of things on this. One is that as smaller firms, and I just want to say that smaller firms are more nimble. They don't have the same resources as the larger firms, but they're more nimble. So being able to maybe collaborate with the larger firms, and maybe this is something that the BSA can do, is kind of pair up the smaller firms with larger firms that already have established systems. Sometimes the other piece is that the BSA has rebranded or the strategic plan is being rebranded right now on creating 3 different cores. One is equity, one is architecture, forwarding, you know, the future of architecture, and the environment. And the equity piece is going to have resources. And if this is something that it seems very important for small firms, we need to advocate for that. And it can come, we can also group with Women in Design, this group, BOSNOMA, and just say, look, the most important thing for us is to do this piece. And there's a budget for that equity piece. And if this is something important and we can put a cost to it, the more work we do behind the scenes to figure out how to you know, engage the board and say, look, this is really important, and that we have to advocate for ourselves as small firms, that this is where we need our resources, because our resources are very different than what the bigger firms need, possibly. So if that would be a goal, to be able to get it into the budget, so that then it could be something where we can share that resource. And maybe it's training through this group. And maybe BOSNOMA could also join, because the more knowledge communities you have, the less duplicating of work there is, the better it is to get a budget in place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Brooke or Allie, any other comments on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, all of that is powerful. One thing I would add is it could be a really interesting opportunity for small firms to get together with each other to share the cost of training, not necessarily small to large. My boss has, and I'm sure we all do, like, kind of a network of other people in a similar position that, bringing together a couple of small cultures may be really interesting to kind of share and really, get to know someone else and make it collaborative for the firms as well, even if you're not necessarily working on a project together. I think that can be, an added benefit of needing to share that training is kind of, testing it out by getting to know more people.
Thank you. So my next question is, what can smaller firms do to advance EDI in their everyday operations and project management? In other words, are there ways to integrate EDI in the day-to-day so it's really part of the office culture, the vision and goals and strategic plan of the office? Brooke, maybe you can start.
I think, one idea that I have and that we sometimes do is, just talking about it we have weekly staff meetings or whatever structure that is already there. If it's something that becomes part of that structure, I think, I'm not a leader of it, but I've participated in it at our office, and even just hearing that it's an open conversation and that this is a topic to discuss, I think is really nice and helps people open up when it's part of that regular rhythm that is already something that is built into the office.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I think also there's different ways of, there's the office and then there's different approaches to it, right? There's the piece about the office, and then there's the piece about the consultants that you work with. And I think one of the most important things that I think from all the work that we've done, and maybe Brooke and Rachel and all of those that were a part of the EDI task force, is accountability. So just even having a checklist, and I even mentioned this to our town, I'm in the planning board and on Needham United Against Racism. And okay, so we have this great vision and this great mission, but how do you hold all of it accountable? So even just doing a checklist that says, do we have the most diverse team possible for the best outcome of this project? Do we, are we including everyone in this thing? Just even having a quick checklist to make sure that until it becomes part of the norm, to make sure that we're following up on it, I think is the most critical piece. Are we educated in EDI? Everyone needs to be educated all the time, because even those of us that talk about it a lot, there's just so much out there and there's so much that we don't know. So don't feel that if you don't know anything about it or you haven't started it, that you're alone. Most firms haven't. And eventually, hopefully, this will be something that we won't ever have to talk about again, that it'll just become the structure. But feel free, to reach out to people, but making a checklist, and I'm hoping that's what the BSA can do, is to help with that checklist. At least we can hold accountability for firms, for members, and for the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And one part of that came up in the task force, I was on the measure side of what we developed, and some great comments from colleagues there were, even a checklist just to establish benchmarks and understand where we are, and then where we are over time and how that changes, is a really valuable resource.
Yeah, hopefully the BOSMA DEI Challenge will help provide that checklist for firms who haven't done this before and just getting started out. So that's one of our big goals. But I also want to go back to what Brooke said earlier about having regular meetings. And I do think that's something that's really important and something that is really an advantage of a small firm. Like Natasha said earlier, as small firms, we can be more nimble, and that's not just in our projects, but also internally. So at Studio G, we also have weekly Monday morning meetings called Commons, and it's usually really quick, 15 to 30 minutes. And a lot of it is about project updates, but it just allows us to see everyone and to hear about what everyone else in the office is working on. There's always time at the end for any lessons learned that people want to share. And so there isn't often like a formal topic of EDI, but it's an open forum for people to feel more comfortable connecting with everyone. And even though I know that we're all very tired of Zoom, there's something nice about Zoom that I found in these meetings and also in our BOSMA meetings, that it's really an equalizer. and everyone is on the screen in the same box, and we're right next to, from more junior entry-level employees all the way up to principals. And it, especially in a small firm, you can really close that gap and you can have closer communication across all levels. And that just, I think, helps to create that culture where everyone feels that they're part of the group and part of an inclusive, welcoming environment.
Thank you. For small firms, we're always wearing a lot of hats, and we don't have the advantage of having an HR department in-house. So how can small firms develop the formal EDI policies without having that resource in-house? Are there other resources that are out there to help with creating policies for smaller firms? Natasha?
I think, again, if you don't have the resources to hire someone to help you do it, just the guides for practice is just a really good way. They have checklists, they have other things. But I think if this is something that people are interested in, this is something that could be a subcommittee of this committee. Sorry, Rachel and others that are here, but it could be something that, or for the small firm group, right? That it could be something that that if there's a need and the resources aren't being found, we could pool together, because I know that administrative budgets for small firms are very different than for large firms. And I think pooling together for would be very valuable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Allie or Brooke? Anything to add?
I think that all makes total sense. I think another side of it is, even just within the office, the nature of a smaller firm means that there's more agency among the people there to kind of take something on if they want. Whereas sometimes in a large firm, there's a lot of processes involved. So I think that's kind of an advantage, and just, supporting anyone who does want to take that on, whether it's an employee level. It's of course important to get leadership support, but I think it can also be conversational. And then of course, there are a lot of tools out there for those teams to get started.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and goes back to that same idea of being nimble, right? Where you can, if you have an idea, you can start it, you can share it easily, and you don't have to go through as many levels of bureaucracy as a larger firm. And when I was at Wilson Butler, a few of my coworkers and I we started what we called the Jedi Council. And it started with just a few of us having conversations, talking about what we could maybe do to improve. But when we wanted to really make formal changes, we needed buy-in from everyone. And so it became a committee that was almost everyone in the firm was a part of. And it sounds like maybe that's inefficient, but I think it's really important to have involvement from every level, and to have buy-in from principals, as well as, even to interns, that it's something that can't be just led by the people who need it the most. It needs to be an effort by everyone. And I do think that is easier in a smaller firm.
But Allie, I think you're in a situation where the leadership is on board with it. So I think even in small firms, if the leadership is not on board, this isn't going anywhere, right? You can do grassroots as long as you want, but there has to be a commitment from the top. And you and I have been really lucky that we've worked, or I am in a firm that makes that a priority.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important. If you want change, there has to be buy-in from everyone.
Are there ways to advocate for EDI if you're not a firm leader? Do you have any suggestions for that?
As a firm owner, and as kind of being in leadership for a long time, and my other firm also, we don't want people, we appreciate people doing grassroots efforts about things that the firm cares about. So I highly encourage it, but I also want to say that it's good when people come with solutions. And so if you come up and you say, this is a huge priority for us right now, and this is something that's very important to us, and this is how we can do it, then it makes it easier for that path to proceed, versus just complaining and just basically saying, we're not doing this, and I'm really upset that we're not doing this. I think coming with solutions and kind of how this could be a positive impact is super helpful, because the people that are in leadership that are making these decisions have a lot of other decisions they need to make. And the more that you streamline it and make a really good cause for it, and a path for it with accountability, the easier it is for someone to make a decision and to be on board.
Yeah, I think, and another part of it is, there's the idea of the triple bottom line, not just financial, but environmental, social. I think that's kind of already a catchphrase, and this is definitely part of that. And sometimes if leadership is not on board, you need to change the conversation and make it, a business proposition that works for them as well. And I think that's part of what Natasha is saying about coming with solutions and a path, and, a well-researched, persuasive argument if necessary. And hopefully it's not.
Yeah, and don't wait for permission. I mean, if this is something that you're passionate about, just do it. And the worst thing that could, I mean, people will respect you for it. And the worst thing that can happen is that it gets modified, but at least there's a path and it shows your passion and the fact that you're moving forward, especially small firms. I mean, those of us that lead small firms, we wear 25 different hats. So having someone take it on, to me is really helpful and encouraging, and it shows leadership.
Great advice. I just wanted to pause here to check if there's any questions in the chat that we need to get to. Christina?
No, not yet.
Nope. Okay. So another.
Please add your questions.
Yes, please do. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat. So my next question for the panel is about creating a more diverse pipeline. And what are some best practices for recruiting and hiring diverse candidates? And what can firm leaders do to encourage a more diverse pipeline? Allie, maybe you can start.
Yeah, so for me, when I think about creating a more diverse pipeline, I think about what we do at BOSMA. We just this past summer hosted our first project pipeline, which is a NOMA national program. It's an architecture camp for kids ages 10 to 15. And we had 27 students this year, which was really exciting for our first time. It was a 3-day camp. And I think doing programs like this really makes architecture more visible and makes it seem like a more possible path. And so we really want to, in BOSMA, we're really focused on connecting with students from as young as 10 all the way through through high school programs, through NOMAS chapters in college, so that they know that there's a support system for them as they come up in the profession. And I think for firms, one important thing to do is to allow your employees time where they can volunteer. It doesn't have to be with our project pipeline, but any sort of volunteer work that allows you to reach young people, I think really helps foster a community. And I think it's important to allow for that to be paid time as well, if you're able, so that it's not something that only the people who are most passionate about it are doing on their free time, but it really becomes something that's a core part of the firm, and to make sure that you're emphasizing building that pipeline, building those connections, and really helping out the next generation.
And I agree with everything that Ali says. I mean, BOSNOMA is a really great resource for all of this, but also it's work, right? So, and you have to do the work. If you want to change your firm, if you want your firm to be more equitable, you have to put effort into it, and you have to try to find people, and you have to make connections, and that, they're just not going to show up at your doorstep, especially if your firm is not diverse. And so the other thing to keep in mind is that if you're creating a firm, or you're leading a firm and you want your firm to see a certain way, you have to have a plan, and you have to say it on your website, because the people that are looking to join firms that are minorities and women want to make sure that there is a path, and they want to make sure that even if you don't have it right now, that you want them to be part of it, right? So no one wants to join a firm where they don't see someone like themselves in it. And because there's so few of us out there that are especially minorities and women also in leadership, you want to make sure that you're joining the right place. So understanding the role of it, and understanding what your goals are for the firm is really helpful. I even do it when we look at consultants. I look at the makeup of their firm to see if their culture is similar to our culture, and also to understand how diverse it is. And a lot of it are relationships. Relationships are super important. So finding mentors, finding sponsors, finding peers that can guide you. I have to tell you that most of the people that have come to us have found us through word of mouth. And that's because they've seen me speak, or for different reasons, right? And so people want to be in places where they feel like they're valued and where they can grow. So you just have to keep that in mind, that what you're showing on your website, how you're presenting yourself, has to be aligned with what you want your firm to be.
I think also when we think about diversity, a lot of times we go straight to hiring and how do we find more diverse people to bring into the firm? But I think it's really important also to focus on who's already there and making sure that the people in your firm are all getting equal opportunities and are being able to advance and are being challenged in the same ways. And in that way, you're creating that culture where people do feel valued, and that reinforces that those are really actually values and not just words that you put on the website. And so you want to make sure, I think what Natasha said is really important, that you want to represent what those values are and make sure that you are also really embodying them in your culture. So I think if you start first by understanding, okay, who do we have here first? And is everyone getting the same opportunities? Are we allowing people to advance in the same ways? And I think one way of doing that is through a mentorship program, to make sure that everyone who comes into the firm, everyone who's been there, has someone that they can connect with. And I think, again, that's an advantage of a small firm, is that it's easier to build those connections, because it can be a little bit of a closer community. And I think once you foster that in the firm that you already have, it'll be easier to attract more people because you have that culture. And if it's not having somebody come in as a token person to represent diversity, it's about having someone really join a community where they know they're going to feel included.
Thank you. Before we open this up to a broader discussion, I do have one more question. It's more about the work that we do as architects. How does the social impact of our work, or how can the social impact of our work address issues of EDI? How can we design for EDI? Maybe Brooke, you can get us started on this one.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And in a way, all of the work we do is social because people use it. But it's not like we're staying in the space afterwards, orchestrating exactly how. So I think where we as architects have a great opportunity is in sort of contributing and shaping the conversations and the relationships during project design, during programming, encouraging clients in certain ways to get more voices in the room if necessary, or reach out to certain consultants, or, we have a lot of power to make certain suggestions and kind of not just bringing our own voice into that, but expanding that in the whole project team that is there at the beginning. And, if that process is open, it's a more likelihood that the space will be supportive of a more open and diverse environment.
I agree. And I also think that usually when we work on projects, we don't include the voice of the users as much as we need to, or the people that, that are going to be using it, and don't look at it with a universal lens. And I think that that is pretty critical. One piece that I always struggle with is some of the architecture, let's say that for the justice system or other projects that people are saying, well, we're not going to take them on. But if you don't take them on with an equitable lens, then who's taking them on? And if those people are taking them on, do they have an equitable lens to it? So it's kind of this catch-22, like, I won't do, prisons, or I won't do this. And this is something that I've been reading up a lot on, about if we're not happy with the justice system, and we're not happy with a lot of these things, how can we start turning the dial on this? And then if we're not involved, then who is involved? And is it status quo better than trying something to make it more equitable?
I think that's interesting that you brought that up, Natasha. Just as a quick plug for BOSMA, we have our chapter meeting next Tuesday at 6 p.m. and that's open to everyone. And we're actually going to be having a conversation about architects and designers' role in mass incarceration and design of prison and jails, and whether we should have a role in that or not. And I think that's really a big topic. So I won't dive into it more, but just wanted to let you know that that is a space for that conversation, as if anyone is interested in exploring that further. But I do think it's extremely important that the projects that we work on reflect the values of equity and diversity, if that's what we're saying is important to us. And so as both Brooke and Natasha mentioned, we really need to think about not just our building, we have to think about the users, we need to think about the community. And the same way of what you present on your website in terms of who your team is, what you present in terms of projects really says a lot about your values and who you are. And it's also one of the things that drew me to Studio G, because a lot of firms focus on sustainability. It's really important, but it can at times be an add-on or a buzzword. And the same goes, I think, for equity. And at Studio G, I really felt based on the type of projects that we do, it's really an integral part of the process. Sustainability and social justice are both part of why we take on certain projects and why we don't take others. And the process is always about engaging the community and making sure that we're not just coming in and putting a building, that we're really talking with the people who are going to be using it and making sure that what we design is beneficial for them and not just about what we want. And so I do think that it's really critical that the projects reflect the values of the office.
Christina, was there something that just popped into the chat?
Yes. The question is from Anne. As I understand it, in this industry, advancement is traditionally tied to becoming licensed. Do you have any examples of other ways to advance that don't require passing the AREs, or innovative ways to support EDI within the existing process?
I guess one thing that I think of when I read that is that small firms are uniquely positioned to not necessarily be a part of the same ladder system that a larger system may be a part of. One of our most senior people is not licensed and doesn't want to be, and that hasn't in our culture. Like, he's in charge of a lot of things, and there's other people like that too. So I think it's easier in a small firm to kind of give people responsibility, whether they're licensed or not, and allow them to kind of select their own path and fit into the culture there. Because there's just more, a smaller, tight-knit group. So I think that's an interesting value that a small firm offers, because not everyone wants to be licensed, but that doesn't mean that they're less of an architect, right? Or are not valuable to the project team. So I think there's a lot of there can be a lot of openness for that in a small firm.
I think also, the way when I was at Lears Weinzapfel, we paid for, and I'm doing the same thing for the first, whenever you take an exam and you pass it, we encourage that. So we pay for it as a firm, and that's a huge investment in the person, and also a huge investment on the future of that person in your firm. And so I think that regarding the ARE, there are a lot of different, the BSA also provides ARE working groups and study groups and it's, I think, AIA New York and BSA together. I think I would encourage that, and for resources, and also, but I think firms have the responsibility, if you want people to be registered, or if that's important to your firm, to help support them, even if there's a percentage of it. So that's one piece of it. The other part is NCARB, I think, and there are some people that are fighting against NCARB for removing the exam or for doing other things. I don't know if that's going to happen in the near future or what's happening with that, but there are questions about equity in the exams. And I don't know right now, maybe BOSNOMA could look into this, or maybe they have already, of scholarships for people who are either not working for a firm and are single practitioners, or for firms that aren't as supportive, let's say, or don't have the means to support it, to be able to, to be able to support them financially, because I think that's the biggest. It's very expensive, and especially if people teach and work part-time and they don't really have the resources, we need to find ways of supporting that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I do recognize that not everybody wants to be licensed or needs to be, and that's perfectly fine. And I do think it's a choice in where you want your career to go, whether or not you want that credential. But one of the goals of NOMA is to increase the number of licensed minority architects, because representation is so low across many demographics. And but it is very expensive. There are many obstacles. It's a very challenging process. So we at BOSNOMA, we also have an ARA study group, and we definitely want to look for more ways to make it more accessible, and help more people get through that process. So for now, we have a study group for ways for people to come together and share resources, because the study materials are also very expensive. I do think if firms can sponsor at least part of the fee, I think that's a really important way to help young architects go through that process. And if there's a way that BOSNOMA can do that, I think that's something that we would definitely consider. Yeah, so I think there are definitely ways that you can advance without a license. It's not the only way to be an architect, but also important is making sure that if you do want to go through that process, that we can make it more accessible.
I do want to bring up Josh's, hi Josh, I think you're totally right on. We jump onto these Zoom meetings and we need to change this. And I think it's a really easy way. And I completely agree with you to add pronouns, and I will do it right now. We jump onto these things from one to the other, and you don't know what's going to come up for you. Sometimes I come into someone else in my office. But I think it's an easy way, and I think it's incredibly inclusive, and I think we need to just be more mindful of it. So Thank you for bringing it up.
And just to clarify, because this is being recorded and they don't get to see the chat, I'd just like to summarize what Josh did note in his chat, talking about sharing of your pronouns in Zoom. It's an easy way to be an ally to transgendered colleagues, and more professionals should consider using them in this and other contexts. Yeah, it's a great point, Josh. Thank you. And so, well, why don't we open it up so that people can raise their hands or just jump in with questions if they have them at this point. I'm just changing the gallery. Okay. There is a raise your hand feature, or you can unmute yourself and just jump in with a question if you have a question for the panelists. This is where we need that music again. So thank you, Anne, for adding. Yours. Go ahead, Anne.
My microphone was up here. So I am not an architect. I'm the company's one non-architect. I'm the administrative person, so I do all the non-architecture stuff in the office. And I joke all the time that I'm here so that I have a new verb. I'm here so the architects can architect. And so, there's office manager, there's receptionist, but I do a lot of HR stuff while not being specifically trained in the HR field. And with all of the new legislation and things that come up in terms of paid leave and remote work and work flexibility, I'm very cognizant of how overwhelming that is for small firms to deal with. And so I've been relying on a lot of resources that we use that have been very helpful for me to interpret, because it's so scary, especially as someone that does HR stuff. If you get some of this stuff wrong, You know, if you get one employee that sues you, like your company is over. So there's a lot of risk and worry about HR things. What can you say? What can you do? How can be more inclusive? And because even though small firms are very flexible, we also know each other very personally, and it's very easy to share information that maybe should not be shared. So I just wanted to share ideas of some other places where you could have resources of, you know, the big guns. Our payroll company, ADP, has tons of newsletters and resources about diversity, what you can say and what you can't say at work. You know, our insurance broker that does our health insurance and things like that, they have resources to a lot of things. There are lots of Department of Labor things that come up because, you know, the issues that affect, even though most of us fall much too small to be affected by things like the Family Leave and Medical Act. You know, if we're going to include and increase the diversity of our workforce, we need to, you know, see what we can offer. We've got that wonderful team, we've got that wonderful flexibility, but we can't offer none of the benefits if we want to attract diverse people. You know, you can't just hire people that are only married to somebody that has health insurance. You know, there's a lot of issues like that that come up. So I would say take advantage of all of the outside resources, you know, because there's a lot of stuff. And it's a way to kind of get help without really putting your neck so much on the line in terms of changing our workforce. You know, we all work remotely. Like, who's generally the person working remotely? It's the mom. You know, what does that do to the women in the workforce? Things like that. So I would really encourage people to have your administrative person, whether they are officially HR or not, take advantage of that stuff, because we're dealing with an environment in which the government is throwing out these great ideas, these great guidelines, but with no legislation or rules to back it up. You know, they just published 2 days ago whether or not I could ask people for their vaccine cards. Is that personal medical information? Things like that. So anyway, just I love that. I'm definitely going to be reading a lot of your manuals and things like that, but reach out to people that do specialize in this, and you know, take advantage, because we don't, like, you know, I don't have the resources of ADP, who does payroll for probably millions of people. So.
And what's the name of your firm, and how many people do you have?
We're Ritter Norton Architects. I'm actually in Alexandria, Virginia. Harry Kelly is our associate principal. He's on the call too, and he's been remote working from Boston. And we have 9 people. And it's a really nice group of men and women. I'd say we're definitely not as culturally diverse as we would like to be. And this has definitely been something that we want to work on. Like, how do we attract? We've been trying to hire people for 2 years, and there's, you know, nobody biting. And it's a fantastic company to work for, but it's been a lot of, you know, how do we reflect visually, you know, what we feel in our hearts.
Yeah. Thank you, Anne. Are there any other questions for the panelists?
I just wanted to make a quick comment in response to what you just said, Anne, about trying to hire and how, you know, it is hard often to reach people if you want to become more culturally diverse and people don't see themselves reflected in your firm yet. It's hard to get people to want to be that first one. So I think it's important to reflect what the values are, the cultures are, but also to make sure that you're reaching out to different networks. So at BOSMA on our website, we have a job board where you are welcome to send us any job postings you have, and it's free to post. So a lot of our members check that. We also send it out to paid members in our monthly newsletter. I think also reaching out to different schools and colleges like HBCUs. I think a lot of times we tend to look within our own network and our own schools and colleges that we went to, which tends to, you know, it's great to connect to people that you know, and you want to hire people that, you know, you have some experience of what their background will be like, what their work will be like. But I think it's also important to make sure that you're reaching further outside of that too.
It's a really great suggestion.
Josh, you have a question?
I was just going to add something to what Ali said with Anne's question, because we've gone through this here at KMA. So I'm the managing principal of a 12-person firm, and we do accessibility consulting and some design work as architects. And I actually had a really good conversation with Tony Ransom about this a few years ago that helped me. And he said everything that you just said, Ali, but he also got me thinking about how, as a firm, we state what the qualifications are for a job position, right? And so it's one thing to say we're an equal opportunity employer, et cetera. It's another thing to say in job postings we are actively seeking out colleagues who are coming from communities that are traditionally underrepresented in our fields, and to say, well, if I'm putting a real premium on the diversity of my firm, that might be more important than Revit skills, or it might be more important than licensure, or you know what I mean. And I think that can also be a way where you recalibrate all the different things that you're looking for in a candidate in order to really try and get over that hurdle of starting to reflect more of the kind of firm that you want to be.
And to add to what Josh said also is that maybe your firm is not diverse yet, right? But you're on the process of it. You can also partner with other small firms that are diverse, and you can market that and say, look, we've been trying to make our firm more diverse. We really want to look for, these opportunities to bring on people. But as we're doing that, we're also teaming with diverse firms to increase the diversity on our projects. And that shows initiative and that shows commitment. So that could be another way of doing it. Because frankly, as a minority, if I don't see anyone in your firm, you have to prove commitment, right? And it has to come from the leadership.
I see that we're inching close to the 1 o'clock mark. But before we go, do any of the panelists have any sort of last comments? Any last bits of advice?
Go ahead, Brooke.
I was just going to say thank you. It's a great conversation, collecting some ideas and resources myself. So thank you, everyone, for joining and piping in.
What I was going to say was thank you also, yes. And thank you to everyone who's here and for the comments. They're really helpful and a great conversation. One thing that I think is really great about this panel is that it's the small firms with the EDI, and there needs to be more cross-pollination with other panels, with other knowledge communities. So I would encourage, maybe with the urban design group and maybe with other groups, that this conversation starts kind of addressing other groups that normally would not be coming to these conversations, because because you'll get other groups who may be interested but don't think they have time. But if it's something where they can be talking about urban design and equity at the same time, or I'm just bringing that one up just because it came to mind, or Revit and equity. I don't know. I just feel like there's a lack of cross-pollination at the BSA. So it's really great to see it here. But I think that's where you can start getting a bigger audience of people that are interested in other things that may not know how to fit equity into their platform, let's say.
And for small practices too, I guess this is a bit of a plug, but Women in Design does a monthly WID Wednesday where we used to go to projects that were designed by local architects, whether they're women or not. And we're always looking for partnerships for that. So I would open it up, and we don't publish that necessarily, but if anyone here has a project that they think would be worth visiting, we're now a little more mobile because we're still kind of doing virtual. Please, let us know. My email address is on the website under Women in Design. And so definitely reach out.
Yeah, I would just end by saying that it's important to remember that all of this is an ongoing process and an ongoing conversation. And so it's not about finding a solution today and being done with it. It's something that we need everyone to work on every day. And I would invite any of you who are interested to check out a BOSMA meeting, consider joining us. I know that for those of us who identify as white or maybe white passing, it might feel that this is maybe not my space, or maybe this is not what I should be doing, but it's really important that everyone be involved and everyone has a role to play. And I think if that's something that you're questioning, I know it's something that I was hesitant about, honestly, at first in taking on the role as BOSMA president, but just remember that if you come into this space, you're not speaking for everyone. And, I don't claim to speak for everyone at BOSNOMA, but I do have a certain privilege in places where other people may not. And so it's important that I use that to advocate for these issues. And so all of us are able to do that in different ways. And so never feel like it's not your place or that you shouldn't be talking about these issues if you feel that maybe they don't personally directly affect you, because they do affect all of us. So just be as you do this, just be mindful of what space you're in and making sure that you're not taking space away from other people, but that you're really contributing to the conversation. And that's how we'll really get there, is by doing this together. So thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Allie. It's a great way to wrap up today. I want to extend a huge thank you to Allie, Brooke, and Natasha for being here today and for your valuable insights and suggestions. I also wanted to thank Dan, Tony, and Rachel of the EDI Network for reaching out to us to collaborate on this session. It's been a wonderful discussion. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.